Nick Vance clutched his daughter's backpack in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other, silently praying his rusty old Honda would start this time. The night air was cold, and the streets of Brooklyn were wet from the rain earlier, not ideal for walking home with a 6-year-old and a busted radiator. But when he saw the woman standing alone near the closed bookstore, looking small beneath the flickering street lamp, he couldn't ignore her. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, adjusting the groceries on his hip as he stepped closer. The woman looked up, startled. Her coat was soaked, her heels looked expensive and ruined, and her long dark hair clung to her cheek. "I missed the last cab," she said, voice soft but steady. Nick glanced toward his daughter, Fallen, who was already buckled up in the back seat. "Look, I've got my kid with me, but I can walk you home if you're nearby. It's not safe out here alone." She hesitated, then offered a tired smile. "That's kind of you. I live just a few blocks down." "Nick," he introduced, shifting the bag again. "And that's Fallen." "Juliet," she replied. "Thank you, Nick, seriously." The walk was quiet at first. Fallen hummed under her breath, swinging her little feet as she watched them from the car window while Nick matched Juliet's pace down the sidewalk. He kept a respectful distance and stayed on the outside of the sidewalk, instinctively protective. "So, bookstore late night run?" he asked, glancing at her. Juliet chuckled. "I was at a meeting. It ran over. I didn't expect the weather to turn." He nodded. "I get it. Been one of those months, huh?" Juliet looked at him, really looked. His jacket was worn, and his jeans had a tear near the knee that wasn't there for fashion. But his eyes were kind. And when Fallen called out from the car asking if Juliet was a princess because of her shiny shoes, Nick just laughed and said, "She might be, kiddo, you never know." They stopped in front of a tall brownstone with a private doorman. Juliet hesitated, suddenly unsure. "This is me," she said. Nick raised a brow. "You sure you live here?" he joked, teasing lightly. She laughed. "Yeah, I promise. I just thank you for walking me. You didn't have to." "Didn't feel right not to," he said with a shrug. "You sure you're okay from here?" "I'm good," she said, then added, "Do you want to come up for a coffee or something? Just to warm up before you walk back." Nick hesitated. "I should get Fallen home, but thanks." Juliet nodded, clearly disappointed but understanding. "Well, thank you again, Nick." He tipped his chin at her and started back toward the car. She watched him go, the back of her neck warm. He didn't ask for her number, didn't try anything, just made sure she was safe and left. Who did that anymore? Inside the car, Fallen leaned forward. She was pretty. Nick laughed. She was. "Are you gonna marry her?" He rolled his eyes with a grin. "Let's worry about getting dinner first, kid." Juliet Tamarin stepped into her penthouse suite, removed her wet coat, and stared out over the city skyline. She'd built this life from nothing. Her late father's real estate empire now doubled under her leadership. Boardrooms, luxury events, a world of people who only saw her last name and her bank account. Nick didn't even ask for her last name. It had been years since she met someone who treated her like a person instead of an investment. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her, not like she was a millionaire, not like she was anyone special. Just a woman alone in the rain. The next afternoon, Nick was late picking Fallen up from school because his second job's shift ran over. Carrying her blue backpack in one hand and a wrapped sandwich in the other, he zipped up her coat as they walked toward the park. "I saw the princess lady again," Fallen said suddenly. Nick frowned. "What?" "She was outside the school. I think she was waiting for someone." Nick narrowed his eyes. "You sure?" Fallen nodded. "She waved at me." That night, Juliet sat in the backseat of her driver's sleek black town car, staring at the modest apartment building Fallen had disappeared into. She didn't know why she was there, only that she hadn't been able to get Nick off her mind. She'd looked him up. Found nothing. No social media, no LinkedIn, no trail. Just one phone number tied to a plumbing company and a patchy address. She wasn't even sure what she wanted to do. But seeing the little girl again had made her heart twist. 2 days later, Juliet was back at the bookstore. She didn't expect to see him again, but there he was, pushing through the door with a tired look and an armful of books for Fallen. He froze when he saw her. "Juliet." She smiled, tucking her hair behind her ear. "Hey, stranger." "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, approaching slowly. "Same." They stood for a moment, in uncertain silence. "You free?" she asked. "Want to grab a coffee now?" Nick glanced at the clock, then nodded. "Yeah, I've got 20 minutes before I pick up Fallen." They sat in a nearby cafe, and Juliet asked him questions. About Fallen, about his work, about how he managed everything. He was honest. "It's not easy. Her mom left when Fallen was 2, it's just us." "I'm sorry," Juliet said gently. He shrugged. "We make it work." When she offered to pay for the coffee, he waved her off and insisted, "I've got it." That night, Juliet couldn't sleep. She wasn't used to this feeling of wanting to get to know someone for no reason other than how they made her feel when they looked at her. He made her feel seen. Over the next few weeks, Juliet found excuses to run into Nick. At the park, at school pickup, at the diner across from his second job. She never told him who she really was. Not yet. She didn't know how. And Nick, he was starting to fall for the woman who always smelled like vanilla and rain. But he didn't dare hope. She was beautiful, kind, too good to be interested in a guy like him. Still, every time they talked, something inside him shifted. And every time she smiled at Fallen like she meant it, his heart cracked open a little more. He didn't know her last name. He didn't know she was a millionaire. He didn't know she'd already fallen for him. Juliet stood frozen in the hallway outside her office, her assistant listing off the afternoon's investor calls, but her mind was elsewhere. The marble floor beneath her heels felt as cold as the expression she wore a mask she'd perfected over years in boardrooms and ballrooms. But inside, she was replaying something soft. Not a negotiation or a deal, but the way Nick had gently wiped whipped cream off Fallen's nose at the cafe yesterday, laughing like he hadn't laughed in years. "Shall I move the meeting with Lexington Holdings?" her assistant asked, holding a silver tablet. Juliet blinked, focused. "Yes, push it to Thursday, and cancel the dinner with the Lombards." "But that's—" "Cancel it," Juliet said, her tone final. She walked into her office, closing the glass door behind her. Her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window stared back. Sleek black dress, hair pulled into a high chignon, diamond studs she'd barely noticed putting on. She looked every inch the woman who had no business chasing after a man who lived above a laundromat and spent his evenings fixing broken sinks. And yet, her fingers hovered over her phone, tempted to call him just to hear his voice. Instead, she pulled up a property listing. How much would it really cost to renovate that school playground? She muttered to herself. Across the city, Nick stood behind the counter of a hardware store, dusting shelves between customers. The air smelled like paint thinner and sawdust, and his back ached from hauling boxes since sunrise. But for once, his thoughts weren't on bills or broken water heaters. They were on Juliet. He leaned against the counter and rubbed the back of his neck. "What's got you distracted?" asked his coworker, Ruddy, a retired electrician who worked 2 mornings a week. Nick shrugged. "Met someone." Ruddy raised a brow. "Yes, pretty." "She's different," Nick said slowly. "Doesn't talk much about herself, but when she listens, it's like you're the only person in the room." Ruddy chuckled. "Sounds like trouble." Nick laughed under his breath. "Might be." Later that evening, Fallen tugged at his hand as they crossed the street toward their building. "Is Miss Juliet coming to the fair tomorrow?" she asked. Nick looked down. "What fair?" "The school one. Miss Carver said parents can come. There's cotton candy," she added, as if that sealed the deal. "I don't know if she's coming, kiddo. I don't think she even knows about it." "You could tell her," Fallon said, skipping ahead. Nick didn't respond. He couldn't shake the feeling that Juliet lived in a world where school fairs didn't make the schedule, where men like him were invisible. But he still found himself dialing her number that night. Juliet answered on the second ring. "Nick." He hesitated. "Hey, sorry to call so late." "No, it's fine," she said quickly. "I was just reading." He smiled faintly. "Fallon wanted me to ask if you'd come to her school fair tomorrow. Totally your call. No pressure." There was a pause. "I'd love to," she said. The next day, Juliet pulled up in a nondescript sedan, dressed in jeans and a pale blue sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. No driver, no designer bag. She stood at the edge of the schoolyard with kids running past her, unsure where to go. Nick spotted her first and crossed the grass toward her, Fallon bounding ahead and throwing herself into Juliet's arms. "You came," Fallon beamed. Juliet laughed, catching her. "I wouldn't miss it." Nick watched them for a moment before speaking. "You look different." She arched a brow. "Good different." "Yeah," he said. They spent the afternoon wandering through booths, Fallon tugging them from face painting to ring toss to a balloon animal stand. Nick bought them snow cones, and Juliet surprised him by winning a game of hoops with a perfect three-pointer. He stared at her. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "Boarding school had a court. I was terrible at field hockey." He laughed. "You're full of surprises." Juliet glanced away. "You don't know the half of it." Later, while Fallon joined a group of classmates under a tent, Juliet and Nick sat on a bench beside the playground. The sky had turned golden, the sun dipping low behind the school buildings. "She's a great kid," Juliet said, watching Fallon chase bubbles. "She is. I don't always know what I'm doing, but we figure it out." Juliet looked at him. "You're doing more than most ever would." He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Then she reached into her coat pocket and held something out. "A little something for Fallon." Nick looked down at the envelope. "What is it?" "Just tickets to the aquarium. She mentioned she'd never been." He hesitated. "Juliet can't." "It's not charity," she said gently. "She's your daughter. You'd take her if you could. This just makes it easier." He studied her, torn between pride and gratitude. "Thank you." She smiled. "You don't have to say yes, just don't say no for the wrong reasons." As the sun sank lower, Juliet felt her phone buzz in her pocket, an alert from her office. She ignored it. "Nick," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "If you knew someone had a life very different from yours, would that change how you saw them?" He tilted his head. "Depends, are we talking about money?" She nodded slowly. "I guess it depends how they used it. Some people buy things, some people change lives." Juliet looked at him, her heart tight. "And if they didn't tell you right away?" "I'd want to know why," he said, "but I wouldn't walk away because of it." She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Fallon came running back, waving a glitter-covered foam crown. "Look, Daddy, I'm the queen of second grade." Nick laughed and scooped her up, spinning her once before settling her on his hip. Juliet watched them, her throat tight. She wanted to tell him everything. The penthouse, the company, the millions in her name. But for now, all she could do was stand beside him, crown glitter clinging to her sweater, and hope he'd still look at her the same when he knew the truth. Juliet stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, staring down at the red dress hanging from the padded hanger in her hands. It was sleek, elegant, and designed by one of the top names in Milan. But it suddenly felt too sharp, too polished. She set it aside and reached for a soft navy wrap dress instead, simple and understated. Tonight wasn't about boardrooms or branding, it was about a man who didn't care about labels. She rarely left her driver waiting, but this time she waved him off and slipped into the back of a yellow cab. The seats were cracked, the air faintly smelled of pine-scented cleaner, and the radio played faint jazz. It grounded her. Nick had invited her to dinner. Nothing elaborate, just his kitchen, homemade pasta, and Fallen's enthusiastic promise of helping with dessert. Juliet hadn't eaten in anyone's home in years, where nothing was plated on porcelain or poured into crystal. She couldn't remember the last time she'd even set foot in a grocery store. When she rang the buzzer, Nick's voice came through, just slightly distorted. "Come on up, 3rd floor." She climbed the narrow staircase, her heels echoing off the worn steps. When Nick opened the door, the smell of garlic and simmering tomatoes wrapped around her like a warm blanket. He wore a Henley and jeans, barefoot, with a towel slung over his shoulder. Fallen sprinted past him and threw her arms around Juliet's waist. "I got to stir the sauce," Fallen beamed. Juliet laughed and crouched to her level. "You're officially the chef now." Nick stepped aside and let her in. The apartment was modest, 2 bedrooms, open kitchen, small living room, but clean and lived in. There were crayon drawings taped to the fridge and a stack of library books on the coffee table. Juliet felt something settle in her chest. Not nerves, something quieter. Something she'd been missing. "You didn't have to go all out," she said, slipping off her coat. "I didn't," Nick replied. "This is all I've got." "I meant that in a good way." Dinner was relaxed. Fallen told a 10-minute story about a boy in her class who sneezed during the Pledge of Allegiance, and Nick rolled his eyes every time Juliet tried to clear her plate without a second helping. They drank lemonade out of mismatched glasses and ate brownies that were slightly underbaked but perfect anyway. After Fallen was tucked into bed after 3 stories, and a debate about whether giraffes could be astronauts, Nick returned to the kitchen and found Juliet drying the dishes. "You really don't have to do that," he said. "I want to," she replied without turning. He leaned against the counter. "You're full of contradictions." She looked over her shoulder. "How so?" "You walk like you've got somewhere to be every second of the day, but you sit like you've got all the time in the world. You dress like you belong on a magazine cover, but you laugh like nothing's ever been polished." Juliet turned slowly, dish towel still in her hands. "Is that a compliment?" "It's the best one I've got." She leaned back against the counter opposite him. "Nick, there's something I want to tell you." He straightened, reading the shift in her tone. "Okay. I haven't been entirely honest with you, not because I wanted to lie, because I didn't know how not to." His jaw tightened slightly. "Are you married?" She let out a soft breath. "No, it's nothing like that." He nodded, then just say it. "I run a real estate company. It's not small. My family left it to me when my father passed. Handle some of the largest development portfolios in the city, and I don't live in a brownstone. I live in a penthouse near Central Park." Nick didn't blink. "Okay." "You don't seem surprised." "I figured it out a while ago." She blinked. "What?" "You don't flinch at cab fares. You knew the name of a private school Fallen mentioned in passing. Your shoes have never seen a clearance rack. I just figured. If you wanted to tell me, you would." Juliet's throat tightened. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it doesn't change who you've been with me, and with Fallen." She stepped closer. "I didn't want to scare you off." "You didn't," he said. "But I might now." Nick looked down at the floor, then back up at her. I'm not intimidated by your money. Just don't want to be someone you spend time with because it feels good to walk on the other side for a while. Is that what you think this is? I don't know. You've got a world that runs on schedules and strategy. I've got a kid who thinks grilled cheese is a gourmet meal. What happens when you get called back into that world and this us doesn't fit anymore? Juliet's voice dropped. I'm not looking for something temporary. He studied her. Then tell me what you are looking for. She stepped closer. Something real. Something that doesn't come with a contract or a press release. Something that makes me feel like I can breathe. Nick's hand brushed against hers. I don't have much to offer. You offered me safety in the rain, she whispered. That was more than anyone's given me in years. His fingers closed around hers. Juliet exhaled. I'm not good at this, he said quietly. I'm not either. They stood there, hands clasped, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. Finally, he said, can't give you cities or skyscrapers. I don't want them, she said. He nodded slowly, then stay. She looked up at him. Tonight. More than that. She felt tears sting her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I want to be here, she said, with you, with Fallen. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. Then maybe we figure this out, one night at a time. And for the first time in years, Juliet felt like she wasn't building a future for someone else. She was building one for herself. And this time, it had nothing to do with square footage or investment returns. It had everything to do with a man who never asked her for anything but the truth. The heavy doors of the Midtown ballroom opened with a hush, revealing a crowd draped in gowns and tuxedos, the air thick with perfume, champagne, and power. Juliet stepped inside alone, her heels silent on the marble floor, eyes scanning the room not for investors, not for rivals, but for the one face she knew wouldn't be here. This was her world. Floor-length gowns, whispered mergers, veiled threats behind smiles. Tonight was a benefit gala supporting urban development hosted by the Tamarin Foundation. Her name was on every banner, her signature across every program, and it had never felt more distant. She shook hands, smiled where she needed to, responded to polite inquiries about upcoming acquisitions. But her mind wasn't on the podium where she'd soon speak. It was 3 neighborhoods away, in a third-floor walk-up where a man was probably helping his daughter with her science project and wondering if he'd said too much the night before. He hadn't. She had. She'd told him she wanted to stay, and she meant it. But wanting something and being brave enough to claim it were 2 different things. Her assistant hovered nearby. 5 minutes until your speech, she said. Juliet nodded, her gaze drifting toward the tall windows framing the skyline. The city looked so polished from here, the edges smoothed out by distance and height, but she didn't want polished anymore. She wanted honest. Messy. Real. She walked onto the stage when her name was announced, accepting the polite applause with a practiced smile. The microphone buzzed softly as she adjusted it. I've been told I should speak about growth tonight, she began, her voice steady. About numbers, projections, the future of our skyline, but I'd rather speak about a different kind of growth. The kind that doesn't show up in quarterly reports. The room quieted, curiosity replacing the usual cocktail-glazed distraction. Sometimes the most important changes come not from what we build, but from who we choose to become, and who we choose to stand beside, even when the world tells us they don't belong in the same story. She paused, her heart thundered. I used to believe love was a distraction, that it was something that happened to other people, but I was wrong. Love isn't a weakness. It's the strongest foundation we can build anything on. Applause rose, but she barely heard it. She stepped down from the stage and didn't stop. She left her clutch on the table, ignored the assistant chasing after her, and pushed through the ballroom doors into the night. The doorman barely caught up. "Miss Tamarin, your car." "I'll walk," she said, already heading for the street. Rain had started again, light and cold, but she didn't care. The sidewalk shimmered under the streetlights as she flagged down a cab. By the time Nick opened the door, his shirt was wrinkled and his expression unreadable. "I left the gala," Juliet said, breathless. He looked past her, then back. "It's not even 9. "I couldn't be there anymore," her voice cracked, "not when I knew where I should be." Fallon peeked from behind him, her eyes wide. "Is she staying for dinner again?" Juliet crouched and smiled at her. "If that's okay with you." Fallon nodded so hard her curls bounced. "We made spaghetti tacos." "That sounds amazing." Nick rubbed his jaw, still standing in the doorway. "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not," she said. "I'm just trying not to run anymore." He stepped aside slowly, letting her in. The apartment was warm with the smell of garlic and something sweet baking in the oven. Juliet slipped off her coat and hung it on the peg Fallon had labeled guests with a crayon drawing. Nick joined her in the kitchen while Fallon arranged napkins on the table. "What happens after tonight?" he asked, voice low. "That depends," she said. "On what?" "On whether you'll come with me to a board meeting tomorrow morning," she said. He blinked. "What?" "Just to sit in, see what I do. I want you to see my world the same way you've let me into yours." "Juliet, I fix toilets and unclog drains. I don't belong in a boardroom." "You belong wherever you want to be," she said. "But I want you to know who I am completely. No walls, no spotlights." He blew out a slow breath. "You're not easy to say no to." "Good," she said, "because I stopped saying no to you a long time ago." Dinner was chaotic and perfect. Fallon declared herself official sauce taster and dropped a noodle on the floor, which Juliet picked up with a laugh. Nick poured glasses of apple juice and passed around a plate of cookies they hadn't meant to burn. They didn't talk about money, or the gala, or what people might say. They just existed, together, in a moment that felt like it had waited its whole life to happen. Later, after Fallon had fallen asleep with a book open across her chest, Juliet stood at the window while Nick turned off the kitchen light. "She loves you," he said. Juliet turned. "I love her." He walked over, stopping in front of her. "And me." She reached up, brushing her fingers along his jaw. "I fell in love with you before even knew your last name." He kissed her then, slow and certain, his hands in her hair, hers at his waist. Not rushed, not unsure, just right. When he pulled back, he whispered, "This changes everything." She smiled. "No, it just finally makes sense." Weeks later, they stood together on a rooftop garden Juliet had purchased and restored for a local school. Fallon skipped along the benches, her laughter rising above the city noise. Nick wrapped an arm around Juliet's waist as they watched the sunset spill gold across the skyline. "You know," he said, "I still can't believe just offered to quit my job and work at a nonprofit you created." She leaned into him. "You didn't just offer, you did it, and I've never been prouder of anything." They didn't need to say the words again, not when they lived them in every breath now. The millionaire and the man who walked her home that night in the rain had found something neither of them had dared dream of. Not a fairy tale. Something better. A real life worth sharing. Nick adjusted the tie around his neck for the third time, standing in front of the mirror with a scowl that deepened the more he tugged at the knot. The silk felt foreign, too stiff around his throat, and the tailored jacket wasn't helping. He'd worn a suit exactly twice in his life, his high school graduation, and his sister's wedding, and neither occasion had involved cufflinks made of platinum. Behind him, Fallon peeked into the room. wearing a powder blue dress Juliet had let her choose herself from a boutique she'd never even dared to enter before meeting her. "Daddy," she said, tilting her head, "you're doing that thing where you look like you're going to explode." He let out a slow breath. "I'm just trying to figure out if this is on backwards." She giggled and ran off, shouting something about asking Juliet for backup. A minute later, she returned with Juliet in tow, barefoot and radiant even in a simple robe, her hair half-pinned and curling at the ends. "You're fighting with a tie?" she asked, stepping up behind him. "I'm losing," Nick muttered. She slid her arms around him from behind, her fingers deftly undoing the mess he'd made. "You know, there's a reason I had this tailored for you. You're not supposed to strangle yourself in it." He caught her eye in the mirror. "I still can't believe we're doing this." Juliet rested her chin lightly on his shoulder, her reflection calm and affectionate behind his. "You mean the fundraiser, or the you living here full-time with Fallen part?" "Both," he said, "but mostly the part where I somehow got invited to speak at an event with the governor and didn't throw up." She grinned. "You didn't just get invited, you earned it. That playground you helped design, it's already being replicated in 3 other boroughs. People are finally paying attention to the way you think. Let's not pretend, even know what to do with a podium." Juliet turned him around slowly, her hands smoothing over his lapels. "You speak from the heart. That's something most people in that room forgot how to do years ago." Fallen leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I think Daddy looks like a movie star." Nick gave her a wink. "You're just saying that so I'll let you have dessert before dinner." She nodded solemnly. "Obviously." The gala was held in a refurbished train station turned event hall, a space Juliet had secured months ago for the launch of their joint nonprofit initiative, something that had started as a modest community project and evolved into a full-scale development program focused on revitalizing underserved neighborhoods without displacing the people living in them. Nick stood at the edge of the room, watching as Fallen twirled in slow, careful circles near the string quartet, her curls bouncing as she danced. Juliet was across the room, speaking with a group of donors, her expression warm but focused. She glanced at him mid-sentence, her gaze catching on his, and smiled in that way she always did when she forgot the rest of the world existed. He still wasn't used to the way she looked at him like he mattered, not just as a man, but as a partner, an equal. The speech came and went. He didn't stumble. He didn't freeze. He spoke about the importance of dignity in rebuilding communities, about listening to the people most affected, about how a 6-year-old girl had once told him that swings should be near the flowers because they smell like happy. When he stepped down, the applause was real, not polite, not performative, real. Juliet met him halfway across the room, her heels clicking softly on the floor. "You did it," she whispered, sliding her hand into his. "I didn't black out," he whispered back, "so we're calling it a win." "We're calling it a triumph." Later that night, after the last guest had gone and Fallen had fallen asleep in the backseat of the town car, they stood alone on the rooftop of the building Juliet once called home. The city lights flickered around them, and the noise of the world felt far away. Juliet leaned into him, her cheek against his chest. "You know, I used to think I was building all of this for my father, for the people expecting me to carry his legacy." Nick held her tighter, and now I'm building it for us, for me, for Fallen, for the life I want, not the life I was told to live. He tilted her chin up. "You're allowed to want things, Juliet. You don't have to earn your own happiness." She smiled softly. "But I want to deserve it." He kissed her, slow and certain. "You do." A soft breeze curled around them, and Juliet stepped back just enough to reach into her coat pocket. She pulled out a small velvet box and handed it to him. Nick stared at it. "Should I be nervous?" "Open it." Inside was a key, simple, silver, worn at the edges. "It's to the new place," she said, "the one we're building together." "I thought we agreed you weren't allowed to buy a house without me seeing it first." "You picked the land, just made sure it had a swing set near the flowers." He pulled her into his arms again, laughter low in his throat. "This still feels like a dream." "It's not," she said. "It's just the beginning." 1 year later, the schoolyard was filled with music, laughter, and the smell of cinnamon from the bake sale Juliet had insisted on coordinating herself. Parents chatted near the community garden, kids darted between booths, and in the background, the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new library was just beginning. Nick stood beside Juliet, Fallen perched on his hip, her face painted like a butterfly. The nonprofit had grown faster than anyone expected. Juliet had stepped back from her corporate duties, placing trusted partners in key roles while she focused on expanding their outreach. Nick had become a voice for practical, community-based change, respected by people who once wouldn't return his calls. But none of that compared to watching Fallen thrive, to Sunday mornings spent making pancakes, to the way Juliet looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. Fallen tugged at his collar. "Daddy, are you gonna kiss her?" He laughed. "I just might." Juliet turned, catching the exchange, and raised an eyebrow. "Is there a vote happening I wasn't aware of?" Nick leaned in, brushing a kiss against her temple. "Unanimous decision." She grinned, tucking herself into his side. "Good, because I wasn't planning on letting you go." And she never did, not for a single day. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Built not from wealth or power, but from trust, laughter, and the kind of love that didn't need chandeliers or champagne to feel extraordinary. It needed only them, together, always.